Since 2007, when the law of attraction shot up in popularity due to the success of The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, which has sold over 30 million copies since, many people have used the concept that your thoughts can create your reality to manifest money, weight loss, or get their dream job or house or partner. Right now, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of books, articles, blogs, and videos of people telling you how you can make your life better just through changing your mindset. Recently, I wanted to see for myself what all the buzz has been about and learn more about what the law of attraction is, how it works, and why it works according to those who use it. So I decided I would research as much as possible and make a video documenting my findings and the conclusions I drew from them. Before doing my research for this video, I honestly wasn't a big fan of the law of attraction. I liked certain aspects of it. I could agree that being more positive helps people attract more positive results into their lives. But what I didn't like was how some people suggest that your thoughts are the only factor involved in getting what you want, and action just isn't very important. If you want a good parking spot at work, instead of leaving your house earlier, you just have to visualize yourself getting it and believe that you will get it, and then you will. So while my initial opinion going into this was that some of the claims people make are kind of pseudoscientific, I went into it with an open mind because I really didn't know a whole lot about it. And so my goal in this video isn't to prove or disprove the law of attraction, and I doubt I'll say anything that's never been said before, but what interests me is whether or not there is a good reason to believe that the law of attraction exists and works. According to thelawofattraction.com, the law of attraction is the ability to attract into our lives whatever we are focusing on. It is the law of attraction which uses the power of the mind to translate whatever is in our thoughts and materialize them into reality. In basic terms, all thoughts turn into things eventually. They also say, the law of attraction dictates that whatever can be imagined and held in the mind's eye is achievable if you take action on a plan to get where you want to be. Depending on the website or guru though, the definitions will slightly differ from each other. Some don't put much or any emphasis on taking action to get where you want to be, aside from journaling and visualizing. Some say you create every aspect of your reality through your thoughts. Some say it only works if you believe it works. Some like to compare it to the law of gravity and claim it's an actual natural law. Since there's not one universal definition, it can be interpreted in many different ways, and I found that most people believe in the law, which I'll call it that on occasion for simplicity's sake, just based on their own personal experiences asking the universe for something and then getting what they wanted in return. You can read tons and tons of stories online of people manifesting friends, money, or a new car. You can look at all the law of attraction success stories and see just how many people's lives have been changed through positive thinking, affirmations, scripting, and visualizing. And I really do think it's great that these things have helped so many people attract what they want in life. But for me, other people's experiences are not going to convince me of the law of attraction. And neither are my own. We're all flawed thinkers, so even if I have an experience that I believe is evidence for the law of attraction, it doesn't mean it actually is. What will convince me is scientific evidence. If we don't have a way of proving its existence, then I don't think I have a good reason for believing it exists until it can be proven. But if the evidence does point towards its existence, then it would make sense for me to believe what the evidence concludes. So I started by Googling law of attraction proof, and the first page I looked at was this one. The author lists 3 experiments that demonstrate the immediate effects of thoughts and feelings. The first is a summer of '93 DC meditation experiment where a group of about 4,000 people participated in meditation for 8 weeks, and violent crimes dropped by 23% compared to what was predicted for that time based on a number of factors like historical crime trends and annual patterns for the area. The experiment is certainly interesting, but because it was only done once, while it may seem unlikely, it is possible that the decrease in crime was due to other factors. And so if the experiment were to be replicated multiple times and we could continually see a decrease in crime during the periods of meditation, then it would definitely strengthen the argument that the decrease in crime was due to the meditation. Even if it was proven that there was a causal relationship, that doesn't explain how the meditation impacted the crime rates. It could just be somewhat of a butterfly effect. The meditation impacted the meditators' thoughts and actions, which in turn affected how they interacted with others, and then how those others interacted with others, and so on. In that case, it does not, as the author of the article puts it, definitively and scientifically prove that positive thoughts can change the behavior of other individuals just by having the thoughts alone. There is no part of the experiment that proves that positive thoughts didn't lead to positive actions, which led to impacting how other people acted, and therefore people committed less crimes. And therefore, I don't think it's appropriate to claim that the law of attraction is what's responsible, at least not in the way that the author describes the law. But again, this brings us back to the difference between what some people perceive the powers of the law of attraction to be. Some think that positive thinking can't have an effect on others unless action is taken. Some think it can. So depending on how you define the law of attraction, this may or may not be evidence, but it's definitely not definitive proof. The second is the 1979 counterclockwise experiment conducted by Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer, which placed 8 men in their 70s and 80s in a retreat center for a week. Half of the men, the control group, would just be reminiscing about life 20 years prior, while the other half, the experimental group, would watch films, listen to music, and be surrounded by props that were from that same time period. Physiological measurements were taken before and after the week-long stay, and it was found that both groups showed improvements, but the experimental group improved more. The men's hearing, memory, strength, and eyesight got better, their blood pressure dropped, and they looked visibly younger. I wasn't able to find any exact results from the study, so there's no way of knowing how large or small the improvements were. It was also a very, very small study, only 4 men in each group, and there wasn't even a real control group of men that just went to the retreat center and didn't do anything related to their earlier days. Even Dr. Ling herself says in her book Mindfulness, many of these changes might take place if elderly men were simply taken on vacation. We cannot be sure just to what to attribute these changes. Given that the person who conducted the study says that we can't be sure what caused the changes, I again don't think it's appropriate to just claim that the law of attraction is responsible. Lastly are the water experiments conducted by Dr. Masaru Emoto in the 90s, where water crystals were either praised or scolded and then frozen. And when looked at under a microscope, the crystalline structure of the water that was praised was beautiful, and the water that was scolded was ugly. I also found this one to be very interesting, but even if every single person on the planet agreed that the praised crystals were prettier than the scolded crystals, that doesn't change the fact that beauty is subjective, it's not scientific. And so what interests me is just the fact that they looked different depending on whether or not they were praised or scolded. But unfortunately, Emoto has not revealed much about the procedures or conditions of the study, which makes the validity kind of questionable. According to former Stanford University professor William Tiller, in Dr. Emoto's experiments, supercooling was neither controlled nor measured, a necessary requirement to be fulfilled if one wanted to prove that it was the new factor of specific human intention that was causative. In 2005, Emoto teamed up with Dr. Dean Radin to try to replicate the experiment, and this time the process is known, but there are still flaws in it. So the photographer was allowed to make the decision of where in each individual tray he wanted to take a picture. So assuming that each tray had crystals that varied in appearance, he could have cherry-picked where to take the pictures. Another thing is that he was also able to send in or not send in whichever pictures he wanted. So he could have cherry-picked which pictures to send in to Dr. Radin as well. And as far as I know, neither of these studies have been peer-reviewed. Yet the author of the article claims that his experiments prove that our intentions can physically alter the world around us. This is a possible explanation for the results, but given the fact that the studies were just not conducted in a way where we can really prove the validity of them, I don't think it's appropriate to claim that the law of attraction is responsible for these results either. None of the 3 experiments the website listed were sufficient evidence to prove the law of attraction, in my opinion, so the next one I looked at claimed to have 6 scientific facts that prove the law of attraction exists. And I was excited until I read the first one, which basically says, Plato said likes tend towards likes, which is just like the law of attraction slogan. First of all, a statement made by a philosopher is proof of nothing other than his personal opinion. Suggesting that what he says is fact just because he's a well-known guy is called an appeal to authority fallacy, and it's not a good argument. Second of all, it is not a scientific fact that like attracts like. Magnets and electricity are both things that this rule does not apply to. Number 2 is a telephone survey of 409 people that concluded that positive thinking may indeed play a significant role in life satisfaction. I would say this is the first one so far that is remotely good evidence for the law of attraction, but only for part of it. It doesn't in any way support the idea that some people who believe in the law of attraction have, that thoughts can affect external things without any action being taken, and we'll call that the magical part for simplicity's sake until we have any reason to believe that it's not magical. This survey only supports the idea that thoughts can affect your own life, which is common knowledge. Next one's similar. The writer explains that visualization can help bring what is visualized into existence, which is supported by this study, I believe. The author doesn't link to a single study in the entire article, so I mean, I guess we're just supposed to take her word for every single thing she says, but I think this is the study she's referring to, and it suggests that visualizing is an effective method at preparing for the future. But that can be explained by the fact that visualizing means we're thinking about something more than we would be otherwise, and therefore we're taking more action to get to the desired goal or outcome that we're visualizing. Again, that doesn't prove the magical part of the law of attraction. Number 4 basically just states that affirmations are helpful for multiple things, and that is supported in psychological literature. One example is stated, and this might be the study for that, assuming that there is a lot of evidence that affirmations can help with recovery from trauma, depression, etc., as the author claims. That still, again, doesn't prove the magical part, because that's only showing how your thoughts can affect yourself. I do believe it's super important that people know that visualization, affirmations, positive thinking are all really good things to do, and it can improve your life, which is supported by science. And personally, I want to incorporate more of these things into my life. So I'm not trying to diminish these things, these aspects of the law of attraction. The 5th one gets a little more sciencey and a little more pseudosciencey at the same time. Mirror neurons help to explain the spread of good vibrations. While bringing up mirror neurons is definitely better than quoting Plato, saying that they're an explanation for spreading good vibes, I can't really figure out how that's concluded. According to Wikipedia, a mirror neuron is a neuron that fires both when an animal acts and when the animal observes the same action performed by another. Thus, the neuron mirrors the behavior of the other as though the observer were acting itself. I'm not an expert on mirror neurons, so I'm not going to pretend like I have a good understanding of them, but I also don't think law of attraction believers should pretend either, especially when it's debated within the scientific community as to whether or not they even exist in humans, because most of the studies done on them have been done in monkeys. And even for those who do believe that they are present in humans, it's still debated what they do, what role they play for us. So claiming that when someone sees you radiating positivity, the same response is mirrored in the brain of the observer, and therefore that's proof of the law of attraction, is more of a blind assertion than a scientific fact supported by evidence. And lastly for this list, the author says that genetics show that limiting beliefs are inherited, and concludes that while you may have beliefs that are holding you back, you are not solely responsible for them. Which sounds to me like evidence against the law of attraction, and I don't know if I'm just being dumb, but I can't for the life of me figure out how this in any way supports the law of attraction. Overall, this article thankfully did have some scientific evidence for some aspects of the law of attraction, but I was still looking for evidence of what I still consider to be the magical side. The next website I found claimed to have a story that would offer undeniable proof for the existence of the law of attraction. Here is that proof. I was sitting in my hot tub. I had wanted one for at least 20 years. The year before, I'd actually done some looking online and found a used one. My lovely wife told me that she wanted to get it for me for my birthday. It was one of the best birthday presents I have ever received, and it continues to provide me pleasure and relaxation. I had dreamed of it for so long that I literally dreamed it into my life. Finding a used hot tub online and then having your wife say she'll buy it for you, followed by her buying it for you, is not undeniable proof of the law of attraction at all. On the next website, the author claims to have more proof that the law of attraction really works. So one day he had decided that he wanted to see if he could manifest a matchbook. And so he was at his friend's house a couple days later, and he came across a couple matchbooks while looking for some batteries in a drawer. Then when he went out to the garage to look for batteries, he found another matchbook. Then the next day he was cleaning out a drawer in his own home. He he found a matchbook, and then an unspecified amount of time later, he was at a pub and saw a guy light a cigarette with a matchbook. Another experiment he did was trying to manifest a tennis ball, and a couple days later, he found a tennis ball about 10 feet from where he tried to visualize that it was going to be in his yard. The author goes on to say, so how weird is that? Where did a tennis ball come out of nowhere in a neighborhood with no tennis courts, no kids, no dogs? In other words, I just can't imagine why it should appear except for law of attraction. There is no other reason for it. This is called a divine fallacy. When you believe something must be the result of a supernatural force because you just can't think of another explanation. Just because you can't think of another explanation does not mean there isn't one, and does not mean yours must be the correct one. What you look for, you see. Just like when you get a new car and then all of a sudden you see your car everywhere. It's not because suddenly there are more of those cars on the road, you just didn't pay attention to them until you got one. It's called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, not the law of attraction. A couple years ago, there was this period of time where I saw the number 23 everywhere I went, probably almost every day. And that lasted for months, and then gradually I just stopped seeing it as much. And that's not necessarily because it stopped being in my life as much. It's just because when I stopped paying attention to it, my mind wasn't remembering every time that I saw it. And so when I'd see the number 23 somewhere, I wouldn't think, oh, there's that number again. I just wouldn't think of it at all. Our minds tend to create patterns where patterns don't exist. We give meaning to things where there's no proof meaning exists because our minds are creating connections between two or more things. Another fallacy we can point out here, and in pretty much all proof of the law of attraction that's just based on anecdotal stories, is called the false cause fallacy, which occurs when a person presumes that a real or perceived relationship between things means that one is the cause of the other. Every time I go to sleep, the sun goes down, which means that the sun goes down because I go to sleep, is an example of this. But in reality, we obviously all know that the sun is going to go down regardless of whether or not we go to sleep. The claim the writer makes that the law of attraction is what caused him to come across the tennis ball and the matchbooks is unfalsifiable, meaning that no one can prove that it wasn't caused by the law of attraction because we can't go back in time and see if he still would have found those things had he not visualized them. But we also can't prove that the flying spaghetti monster isn't the reason he found them. But just because something can't be proven false doesn't mean it's true. And without really strong evidence, it's not a very good argument. The next website I looked at claimed it would give skeptics the proof they needed to believe the law of attraction works. So one day, the author had written in her notebook, "For the next 48 hours, I'm asking the energy field to make its presence known to me in the form of a surprise. I'm asking for a clear big sign, something that cannot be a coincidence. Thank you." The next morning, she woke up to an email from her boss saying that they were going to give her a raise. So my first question is, how does one determine what can and cannot be considered coincidence? It's completely subjective, which means the author can choose what she considers to be a coincidence or not be coincidence. And then my second question is, how do we know that the boss didn't already plan to give her a raise before she asked the universe or the energy field to give her a sign of its presence? I don't know much about being a boss or giving raises, but my assumption, and I could be completely wrong, is that bosses usually think about this stuff more than like a couple hours before they just decided to email an employee and give them a raise. I also don't quite understand the notion that her asking the energy field for a sign could affect the decisions of the boss. Does this mean that we don't have full control over our own actions? Because a lot of proponents of the law of attraction kind of promote that your life is based on your thoughts and your reality. You create your own reality. Your thoughts create your own reality. But if that's true, then how can the author's thoughts and manifestations affect the decision of the boss? And can one person's manifestations interfere with another person's manifestations? Say, for example, two people go to work at the same job on Monday at 9 o'clock, and they both want the same parking spot. But they're both big believers of the law of attraction. So they visualize themselves getting the law of attraction, they journal about it, and they believe that they will get it. How do we determine which one will get the parking spot? They're both trying to manifest the same spot using the same methods. So is it just whoever wants it more or who believes they will get it more? Or what if only one person uses the law of attraction to manifest it and the other person doesn't do anything? Does that mean the person who used the law of attraction is more likely to get the spot? And can we prove that? Can we demonstrate that in any way? Or wouldn't it just be whoever gets there first, whoever takes the action to get the spot is going to be the one to get it? I also think it's important to be aware of the fact that asking for really vague things, I'm asking the energy field to make its presence known to me in the form of a surprise, means that you can pretty much interpret anything you want as the universe responding. And there are tons and tons of stories out there of people asking the universe for a sign and getting what they determine is a sign in return. For many people, this is very convincing evidence of the law of attraction. But what if that only works 10% of the time? What if 90% of the time people actually don't get anything in response, but you only hear about the 10%, so it makes it seem like the law of attraction is just working for everyone? Of course, someone can say, oh, everyone will get a sign. Some people just don't notice it, don't realize it's a sign. And maybe that's true, but how do we demonstrate that? And if we can't demonstrate it, do we really have a good reason for believing it's true? It's common for people saying they have evidence for the law of attraction to just list off a bunch of things without demonstrating how each individual thing can help you manifest something through the law of attraction. And you know, when you're trying to prove something causes something else, you have to show that there's a link between the cause and effect. Where does the cause create the effect? And a lot of people will just say, okay, here are 10 different things you can do to manifest X amount of money using the law of attraction. You'll see articles and videos on this, and you might do those things and you'll get what you want, and you'll attribute your success to using the law of attraction. But in reality, you really have no way of knowing which or if any of those things contributed to you getting what you want. You can only really make a guess. According to the website from earlier that listed 3 things that weren't really scientific proof for the law of attraction is just one of the laws that govern our universe. There are others, like the law of gravity, for example. You can't defy the other laws of the universe, so don't expect to. In that way, no, you can't just make anything happen. You're also competing with other people's intentions, both good and bad. So be aware that if your desire is in direct conflict with someone else's stronger desire, the universe will respond accordingly. The law of attraction does not give you full and total control of your life. It simply states that like will attract like. This is different from how other people define the law of attraction. Some say, or at least imply, that every negative thing that happens to you is a result of your mindset. And so this one clearly says otherwise, and how do we know who's correct? It seems to me like people just base their definitions of the law of attraction on personal opinion, because there's no proof that the law of attraction is a law that governs our universe like the law of gravity. Just because humans put the word law into a term doesn't make it an actual scientific law. According to the Wikipedia page for scientific law, laws are developed from data and can be further developed through mathematics. In all cases, they are directly or indirectly based on empirical evidence. And that's just not the case for the law of attraction yet. Maybe it'll be proven in the future, but until then, it's dishonest to pretend like it's a law that governs our universe. And like I said earlier, the law of attraction might state that like attracts like, but that's not true 100% of the time, and that can be proven scientifically with magnets and electricity. Thankfully, the site does say it's an oversimplification to think that every bad thing in the world happens because someone wasn't positive or intentional. Because it really rubs me, and I'm sure a lot of people, the wrong way when others claim that every negative thing in your life is a result of your mindset. Like, if you were abused as a child, it was your fault, not the fault of the person or people who abused you, which is absolutely absurd to claim, and no one ever would claim that. But that's the implication when you blame the individual for every bit of negativity in their life. Right before that, the author responds to the question, "I tried to manifest being rich, but I ended up losing money. What happened?" To which she replies, "It's hard to say what happened, but more than likely you have fears that you aren't addressing with compassion." So how does one determine what's caused by one's own thoughts and not using the law of attraction properly or completely versus what is caused by the actions of others? In my opinion, saying that somebody didn't use the law of attraction properly when they don't get what they want is kind of just a cop-out answer. If I were to say there's a time in my past where I had wanted something really, really bad and I didn't get it, I might be told, well, you have to visualize and you have to believe that you will get it, etc. But if I were to say that I had wanted something really, really bad in the past and had gotten it without using the law of attraction, I might be told by the same person, oh, well, you did use the law of attraction, you just didn't know it. But as you can see, the standards were changed. Why in the first scenario did I need to visualize and believe I would get it in order to get it, and in the second, I didn't have to do any of that and I just got it anyways? After reading many different articles, I'd still not found what I consider to be sufficient evidence for the existence of the magical part of the law of attraction. But the next website I looked at was called How Quantum Physics Explains Manifestations, and I figured this one would be based on a little more demonstrable scientific evidence than the others. The website links to a video about something called the double slit experiment. You can watch the video in full here, which I highly recommend doing. But to summarize, when electrons are fired through two slits onto a wall, they create what's called an interference pattern, similar to waves rather than particles. Scientists were confused by this and thought that maybe the electrons could be interfering with each other, causing the wave-like pattern. But when they fired the electrons one at a time, it created the same interference pattern, which led scientists to determine that each individual electron interferes with itself. It splits up, goes through both slits, and then interferes with itself on the other side. Apparently, mathematically, the electron goes through both slits, neither slit, and just one and just the other, all at the same time. So physicists decided to use a machine, which is often called the observer, to detect which slit each electron actually goes through. And when the electrons were being observed, they produced a pattern like a particle, not a wave. So when the electrons were being measured, they acted differently. And of course, it's a lot more complex than my summarized description, but when I first came across this, I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And apparently this is like a really well-known experiment, so I'm probably one of the few people who's never heard of it, but I was like, this might actually be really good evidence for the magical part of the law of attraction. Unfortunately though, sites that talk about quantum physics in relation to the law of attraction often don't go into too much depth regarding the connection between the two without jumping to conclusions that aren't exactly supported by scientific facts, likely because the quantum world is not easy to understand. This website says, for example, quantum physics has now shown that everything is a wave and our thoughts collapse waves into particles of matter. Now, I don't want to try to refute claims about quantum physics too much because I obviously don't have the expertise to do so, but to my knowledge, the double slit experiment says nothing about what human thoughts can do to waves and particles. The observer in the experiment is a measurement device, a machine, not a person. And this is just one of the countless examples of proponents of the law of attraction misrepresenting what the actual conclusion of an experiment is and interpreting it the way that best fits their agenda, when in reality, even physicists who have spent their entire lives studying quantum mechanics don't really fully know what's going on here, and they have put forth multiple different interpretations that could be possible. Gaps in scientific knowledge are not an open invitation for people who have little to no knowledge on the subject to insert baseless claims as fact. According to the author of this article, any student of physics, and in particular quantum mechanics, will tell you that reading articles in the media that concerns any element of quantum physics can be a minefield. Ideas are frequently misunderstood or purposefully misrepresented. This is never more true than when Young's double-slit experiment is presented as evidence that the presence of a human being can fundamentally change the behavior of matter at a particle level. He also claims that it is not the presence of the conscious observer that collapses the wave function. It's the action they perform on the system that causes the wave function collapse. When electrons are fired at a fluorescent screen, when we bombard the electrons with photons, the interaction changes the state of the system catastrophically, as despite lacking mass, photons do carry momentum. And I honestly have no clue if this is true or not, because I just don't understand quantum physics that well. But neither do the people writing books, articles, making websites, videos about the law of attraction. When people oversimplify the double slit experiment and state it as absolute proof for the law of attraction when they don't even have a very good understanding of quantum physics in the first place, because it's a very complex and mysterious subject, that just doesn't sound like very good evidence for me. The rest of the websites I read through and videos I watched all seem to state the same things I'd already seen as proof: anecdotal stories, mirror neurons, and quantum mechanics. So I decided I would go to the library and see if I could find some books that went into a little more depth. I thought this would be promising, but between the 2 libraries I went to, I actually couldn't find any books on the law of attraction. I guess they'd all been checked out, or I was just looking in the wrong spots. But when I got home, I figured I'd get one of those free month-long Audible trials and listen to a book. I chose E Squared by Pam Grout, which goes over 9 do-it-yourself energy experiments that prove your thoughts create your reality, because I'd seen it mentioned by many different people and figured it'd be interesting to see what kind of results I would get. Like I said earlier, my own interpretations of events that happen in my life are not going to convince me that thoughts can create things without any action involved, but I figured I'd just give it a try anyways. So a couple days ago, I listened to the preface, introduction, and experiment 1 of the book, which totaled about 1 hour and 15 minutes. The audio for the first experiment was almost 20 minutes long, but the majority of it is just the author criticizing Christianity, which was completely irrelevant to anything. It took about 1 minute to explain the experiment. It's supposed to prove a loving, totally hit force in the universe, and I was supposed to say to what she calls the field of potentiality, which is defined as an infinite, unseen, energetic force or power, something along the lines of,
I'm giving you exactly 48 hours to make your presence known. I want a thumbs up, clear sign, something that cannot be written off as coincidence.
And so to be extra sure I did it right, I just repeated it verbatim. I'm giving you exactly 48 hours to make your presence known. I want a thumbs up, clear sign, something that cannot be written off as coincidence. Something that kind of confuses me is that the author says that you have to expect or believe that you will get something, a message in return, with your entire heart and soul. And the problem is that we can't choose what we believe in. I can't all of a sudden decide that I'm going to believe in unicorns today because I don't believe in them. I can say that I believe in them, but that doesn't mean I actually do. And so for me to believe that this is going to work is impossible because I've not been presented with enough evidence for me to conclude that it's going to work and therefore lead me to believe that it will. I don't know if it will. And so since I'm going into it with a skeptical mindset, I guess an excuse that somebody could make is that I didn't believe that it would work and that's why I didn't. And that's the problem with this kind of experiment. If you believe something is going to happen, you're more likely to look for signs that will confirm that belief. The tendency to search for information that confirms pre-existing beliefs is called confirmation bias. And I personally believe it's a huge factor in why so many people contribute events in their lives to the law of attraction, even when there's no clear link between the two. And then for people who, like I was, are skeptical and will admit that they don't know whether or not it's going to work, there's a perfect excuse for why it doesn't. And then the thing you have to ask for is, of course, vague, and what can and cannot be written off as coincidence is completely subjective. And then I also don't understand how she chose the 48-hour time period. Why not 24 hours? Why not 36 hours? Why not 1 hour? Why can't the field of potentiality just deliver its message right away? So it's been over 48 hours since I started my experiment, and absolutely nothing happened. I did not get any clear signs at all. I mean, I could not possibly imagine what has happened in my life in the past 48 hours that is a sign of anything remarkable, of any energy or universal force showing me its existence. I mean, I literally have just been working on this video, and my friend invited me to go to Walmart with her to pick up a prescription, and my mom texted me once, and I made food for myself, and that's really all that's happened. Nothing in my life that's out of the usual has happened. So I may continue to go through the rest of the 8 experiments, but if they all require my prior belief in them, then it's probably going to be a waste of my time. I also decided to watch the documentary The Secret, in which the book The Secret was based on. There really isn't much in it worth talking about that wouldn't be repeating what I've already said. There were a lot of generalizations made. It wasn't really all that interesting. There are a few things that I enjoyed and benefited from hearing, but overall it was just kind of weird.
I got the pleasure of working with a couple of the astronauts that have been on the other side of the moon, and they could think. Not only could they think on the other side of the moon, they could transfer their thoughts to somebody here on Earth. It's just a form of telepathic communication.
I cleanse every Monday. I just do a cleansing diet where I just drink liquids and then I don't eat anything else, and my liver has a chance to get rid of all the toxins that are in my body.
If you look around, there's nothing but the abundance everywhere that you see. You see the trees growing, you see businesses happening, This is wealth, this is prosperity, this is abundance. If it's not happening for you, it's because unconsciously you have beliefs, counter intentions, negativity that actually blocks it from coming into your life.
Sometimes there's a detour in life. I heard somebody once say that sometimes the most beautiful scenes in life are the ones we observe on a detour. Have you ever gone on a detour and realized that your life wouldn't have been the same if you hadn't taken that twist or that turn in your life?
If you are not happy with things the way they are, then your happiness is perpetually on hold pending a condition that doesn't exist yet. If you do that, you will never be happy.
It was like a mix of an episode of Ancient Aliens, an orientation film to a cult like Scientology or something, and some really low budget BBC documentary from the 90s that you watch in like a middle school history class. I wouldn't even recommend it to like the biggest fans of Law of Attraction, honestly. So while I'm sure I could find a ton more information out there that I haven't come across yet, I can't spend all month working on this video, but I do feel like it's pretty telling that most of the evidence that comes up when you search for it isn't scientific. And the stuff that is only evidence for part of the law of attraction. And just because a part of a whole is correct or proven doesn't mean the entirety of it is. We can demonstrate that affirmations, visualization, and positive thinking can improve our lives and help us accomplish our goals. And like I said earlier, I don't want it to seem like I'm diminishing these things just because I don't yet believe in the mystical, magical side of the law of attraction. These things are super important and they do help. I don't just believe that because I feel like they help. I believe that because we have scientific evidence and we can demonstrate that they work. And they work because they help you focus on your goals, so then you're more likely to take actions that lead to you reaching those goals. No oversimplifying or misrepresenting of quantum physics is needed to prove that. And unfortunately, I know there will be some people who are watching this who don't think scientific evidence is important or think that the law of attraction is beyond science. Some people value personal experiences over anything else. But humans are flawed thinkers. No matter how deeply you feel about a subject, your feelings are not proof of its existence or validity. Believing that you've seen 100 ghosts in your lifetime might convince you that ghosts exist, but it is not proof that they exist because you can misinterpret what you're experiencing. It's a big problem when people resort to demonizing rational, logical thought when they can't use them to prove their opinions. When you don't have a rational explanation or demonstrable evidence to back up your claims, you say that science is overrated and can't prove everything, and if you don't believe that, then you're just not woke enough. But all the advances we have today are because we've used logic and scientific experiments, not anecdotal evidence, to make conclusions about reality. We would not know nearly as much as we do about mathematics, science, and history if we just went off of word of mouth and personal feelings. Personal opinion is not a good way to determine truth. If I, for example, believe in reincarnation because I just feel like it exists, my intuition just tells me it exists, and I think that's sufficient evidence for its existence, but somebody else just feels like it doesn't exist and their intuition just tells them it doesn't exist, we aren't any closer to determining whether or not reincarnation actually exists. Our intuitive feelings speak on nothing other than our individual perception and interpretation of reality. And based on the fact that we can feel different ways about different things, how can we call that a good method of determining truth? And if it's not a good way to determine that reincarnation exists, then do I have a good reason to believe that it does? What if I tripped on mushrooms or had an out-of-body experience where I was told by something that reincarnation exists? Then does it mean it does? No. Being in an altered state of reality and getting messages or having feelings about something is not proof for anything either, because somebody else can take some acid or have a near-death experience and come to a different conclusion about what happens after we die. Personal experiences are not stronger evidence than reliable, falsifiable data. Another thing that's common with just about all metaphysical pseudoscience is the argument that there are tons of things we know today that we didn't know hundreds of years ago, so just because we don't have proof of the law of attraction right now doesn't mean it doesn't exist, which is completely true. But to assume something is true just because it hasn't been proven wrong yet is not a good reason to believe in it. It's an argument from ignorance fallacy. It's no different than believing in the flying spaghetti monster just because it hasn't been proven to not exist yet. If the mystical part of the law is proven one day, then we'll have good reason to believe in it. But until then, all we have is misinterpreting hard to understand science and anecdotal evidence. So if you care about what's actually true, don't downplay reason and logic. If you really think the law of attraction is beyond what science can comprehend, then how can you possibly comprehend it enough to know it exists? Something I think can cause harm to people when promoters of the law of attraction talk about negative thinking is that people can get this idea that it's really bad to have negative thoughts, and if they have them, then they're going to attract more negativity into their lives, and therefore they just push the emotions away, try not to think about them. And it's really, really unhealthy to ignore or suppress any types of emotions. Even if you try not to think about them, they still exist within you. And sooner or later, you'll be forced to deal with them because you've spent so long bottling them up. It's much better to journal, to talk to someone, or in any way that works for you. Try to understand what caused them so you can deal with them and let go of them in a healthy way. I also think if used in the wrong way, the law of attraction can cause people to kind of skip the process, focus on the results. When there's so much emphasis on getting a new car or making X amount of money, it can be really easy to just have such a future-focused mindset to where you're not really being present. You're not having appreciation for where you are now in your life because you're just thinking about your goals. Much of the teachings of the law of attraction have to do with making a lot of money and getting material objects. And it seems to me like a lot of people aren't okay with just being financially stable and having a nice apartment. They want to be making 6 figures and living in the perfect luxury apartment. Money is often called a form of energy. In my opinion, that's just a euphemism used to make people sound less greedy. And then if you don't think it's everyone's birthright to be a millionaire, then you have a bad money mindset, or you think money is evil. In reality, there's a happy medium. You know, if you're not making enough money to live comfortably, it's completely understandable that you'd want to make more money. But if you're a single, childless person in their 20s who's trying to manifest a higher income, even though you already make $200K a month selling random stuff on Instagram to little kids, you're greedy. So I'm sure there's more evidence out there for the magical side of the law of attraction, and I'll definitely continue to research a little bit here and there and see what I can find. But for now, I don't think personal stories and twisting scientific data is enough for me to believe in the mystical side of it. And as Carl Sagan once said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And we don't have that. So until we do, I will remain a skeptic, because it's okay to not know. It's okay to not have all the answers. And I feel like in this situation, for anyone to pretend like they do is either dishonest or ignorant. But I would love to be proven wrong. So if you disagree with anything I said, don't just go to the comments and tell me I'm not woke enough. Tell me why I'm wrong. Give me your evidence. Give me links to articles, to videos, to whatever. And I know that links usually go to spam, but I'll go through my spam. So don't worry about that. It would be great to get to hear everyone's different perspectives on this topic, but don't be mean or spiteful to me, because remember, like attracts like.